Anything else? What else do we get? Anybody have trouble sleeping? I don't during the day when I'm supposed to be awake doing things. I can nod off real quick, but sometimes I wake up every 2 or 3 hours at night, sometimes every hour. Anything else? So it helps our sleep. Won't get sick as often. All right. What about folks that are depressed or anxious? Does it help them? Nobody has problems with depression or anxiety. If you've had kids, this may sound familiar, it may not. I can remember, I think I remember when I stopped sleeping straight through all night long. I think the oldest one was maybe 16. I think it kind of stopped from then because if I wasn't aware of what was going on, and this indicates a lack of trust, I know, but when somebody would be somewhere that I cared about, somebody I cared about would be somewhere I didn't know where that was, and I would be sleeping for a while, and then here I am wide awake thinking, where are they? What's happening to them? And some gratitude then, and a little more faith might have solved that. Well, we said grateful people are less inclined to feel resentment and envy, which makes sense. Higher level of the experience of gratitude as an emotion, the more likely the instance of higher levels of positive effect, which is what Billy Sam shared with us. Positive emotions broaden and enable the opportunity to build. Gratitude is a disposition that allows others to improve as well. Now, why might that be? And I know we talked about this some. See if you can remember. Why would us being grateful help anybody else? Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Proverbs talks about that, doesn't it? About the person that wants to argue and fuss, or the ones that says a kind, calming, sweet word, and what effect that has on other people. Okay. We make a difference, don't we? And if you believe the old theory about the butterfly effect, whatever that was, you know, the butterfly beating its wings off of the coast of South America affects a typhoon in Japan. I think that was the example that was given. We're all interconnected, aren't we? So what we do makes a difference. Perspective taking and care for others improve when an intentional shift toward gratitude is taken. Intentional. I was going to ask this too. Is gratitude an emotion? Do we feel anything when we're thankful? Okay. Is that all it is? Okay. This statement said an intentional shift toward gratitude. And the name of the book was Choosing Gratitude, wasn't it? A choice indicates an intention, I would think. An intention indicates choice, one or the other. Okay, let me ask you this. What is gratitude? And this, again, we had a two-part definition from the head folks. Okay. Okay, so So if we are thankful, that indicates that we are affirming that there is good, right? An affirmation of goodness. There are good things in the world. There are good gifts. There's good benefits that we receive. So that's part of it, us admitting that there are good things, right? And then the second part is that we recognize what else? That goodness what? If we say thank you, what are we understanding? What are we recognizing? The giver, yeah, that there's somebody to say thank you to, isn't there? So we recognize that the sources of goodness are outside of ourselves. We can thank ourselves, I guess, but it seems a little bit strange. I understand we're supposed to love ourselves and have confidence in ourselves and all of that, but I don't think we get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, thank you, Tommy. You're quite a guy. We probably don't do that. But if we have any sense about us, we may say that to our spouses when we see them first thing in the morning. I don't know. I think that might be a pretty smart thing to do. Okay. Can you look up some verses for me? I've got my little Bible, but I have to put glasses on and off. The ones that we looked at last week. Can somebody get 1 Thessalonians 5:18? And then the other one was Ephesians 5:19 and 20. I hope you've thought about those verses over the last week or two. And I hope by the things that we mentioned here that it does help you to maybe think and wonder about some things during the week. Who's got 1 Thessalonians 5:18? Somebody read it. Yes, sir. You read it for me.
In everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you through Christ Jesus.
Okay. You can show your hands or not. Who wants to do God's will? Those of you who raise your hand, I know you do. I think you do. I don't think you'd be here if you weren't concerned about doing it. He said, this is God's will that you what? Show thanks in everything. All right. There's kind of another part of that in Ephesians 5:19 and 20. Who's got that? If you wouldn't mind reading it. 19 and 20. Ephesians 5:19 and 20. That makes it a little easier to remember, doesn't it? 1 Thessalonians 5 and Ephesians 5. And the verses are within one or two of each other. 18, 19, and 20. You got it?
Speak to one another with songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
All right. We've always looked at that verse and picked out just a couple of things, and I know I mentioned this last week. Those of us who love to sing, that's not been any problem ever. Love to sing and make melody in my heart and encourage others. I hope it's encouraging when I do it. Some people don't want to sing because they think they'd bother somebody else. I used to teach kids, and one or two of them, somebody had told, oh, you can't sing, and I thought, please don't ever tell a kid that. I read years ago that there's a couple of things that children do innately, automatically, if they can at all. One is to sing and one is to dance. And sometimes they're real quick to hinder that. Stop a child from talking or a child from dancing. We've got a 4-year-old, nearly 5-year-old running around our house a lot now, and he takes care of both of those pretty well. Now, I guess making a beeline from here to there we call dancing, I'm not sure. He'll turn around in circles and go hither and yon, and the voices, we have to kind of talk about that indoor voice once in a while. Natural things to do. After that, though, he says, Sing to one another in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, sing make merry heart to the Lord. Always giving thanks for everything. Okay. What then is the main difference? It seems obvious to me, and we kind of mentioned it. So what does it look like is the main difference between the psychological idea of gratitude and the biblical or spiritual idea of gratitude? What seems to be the main idea there? Both of them say be thankful. What does the Bible say? Does it say just for the good things that happen in your life, just people that do good things to you, just for what we ask for or want? It says everything, when? All the time. Everything all the time. That's a big difference to me that seems obvious between what the psychologists say about gratitude and what the Bible says about gratitude. And I think, for me especially, I've been much more prone, even though I've read about it in the Bible first, to have the attitude that the psychologists have than the one that the Bible says. And that then is what we're going to be looking at the rest of the time here. I was talking to Judy about spending 3 weeks on what I had just prepared for 1 week, and she said when she taught a lesson, she needed to have a stopping place. And I got to confess to you that the years that I spent in Tuya teaching the auditorium class there, a lot of the folks there were concerned about whether they would live long enough for us to finish any particular study, and there were 1 or 2 of them that didn't. I'm sorry about that. So you might not have known that, and if you need to leave because that is not how you want a class to be, you want to start in a stopping place, well, this is your chance. I'll hide my eyes and go, or I won't even say anything. I'm sorry if that's what you need. I don't approach things that way. I used to read nothing but, nonfiction. I thought, I'm not going to waste my time reading stuff that's not true. And so I would catch myself having about 5 books open and laying around and never get but a paragraph or 2 any of them, because I'd read this and I'd think, well, now, I saw something over here, and so I'd go read that and over here. And I thought, I'm reading so slow, I'm never going to get anywhere. So I bought a couple of speed reading courses. You know how you just flip through the pages and let your eyes, didn't remember anything that I read, consciously or I guess subconsciously, but I didn't. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll try reading fiction, which is not so important, and I won't be stopping every page. And so I started reading fiction a lot, and I did speed up. But the general idea is that if I see something I think about, well, I stop and think about it. And so that's how I proceed. This past week, I've gotten several calls from folks with a Middle Eastern accent that said they were from CVS and wanted to provide me with COVID test. I believe that's what they said. Thing of it was on my phone, and they're wanting to speak to Judith Stewart. Is this Judith Stewart? And this is part of my confession. A couple of times I said, do I sound like Judith Stewart? I know that wasn't very nice. And then I hung up. It made me think, though, yesterday. I had an opportunity there when these folks were calling me and bothering me, and I guess trying to make a living the best way they could, even though I didn't particularly think that was a good way. I had an opportunity probably to say something kind or to be grateful for whatever reason for that call and seemingly irritative bother during my day, which it didn't cost me any time or anything. Things like that irritate me and bug me, and I think about the dishonesty of the folks doing it. But the verse said, always be thankful for everything, and I didn't. I'm the unofficial Uber driver for myself and Judy and the grandkids here and there, and we go to Amarillo quite a bit to see highly trained professionals in their field. We go see the doctors. And there's nearly always somebody driving like I don't think they ought to be driving. And something makes me think I need to do something about that, and so quite often I'll honk. Not in a gentle beep way, but boy, I sit on that thing. Because I think they're about to hurt somebody. And gratitude is not the foremost thing on my mind right then. And I really got to thinking about that yesterday. I'm going to stand in front of a class and try to teach about an attitude of gratitude. And so many, many times I have opportunities for that, and I let it go by. We think, oh, that's silly, Tommy. That's silly. Well, I don't know, is it? If from nothing more than self-interest, choosing gratitude makes sense, to a significant degree, your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, as well as the health and stability of your relationships with others, will be determined by your gratitude quotient. Now, we haven't used that term yet, and maybe in a couple of weeks we'll actually get to a little questionnaire that supposedly gives us our gratitude quotient, but we just for right now we'll just use that term so we find out what it is. Cultivating a thankful heart is a safeguard against becoming prickly, bitter, and sour. And when I take it upon myself to police drivers and the livelihood of folks with a Middle Eastern accent, I'm actually pretty bitter and prickly and sour. So I guess that indicates to me, I don't know, it could indicate a lack of faith. I used to think that's what it was. A long time ago I thought, in my opinion, I will feel like my faith has evolved to a pretty good point when I don't want to lock anything up or be afraid of somebody taking anything from me. That was going to be my standard for faith if I didn't care about stuff. And I'm not there yet, so my faith has a way to go. And now I'm wondering if there's not a lot of things I can't measure by heartfelt gratitude. A grateful child of God can't help but be a joyful, peaceful, radiant person. Most of us have probably spent our life, especially earlier in our life, with the idea that we need to be following the Great Commission. Go out and teach, baptize. And I can remember when there were certain home courses that were set up with slides and charts and all of that, that sometimes the attitude of the teachers then might not have been one that enticed the folks they were trying to teach really to change and become a Christian. I knew a gentleman, he was my dad's friend, and for years and years he had, in his later life, had married a woman who went to the church, came to church, and he had been of another belief, another denomination. And I think he sat through 2 or 3 of these studies, and every time at the end when they'd say something about changing or being baptized, which for him would have been again, he said, oh, I think I'm fine. Well, in his later life, bless his heart, he asked me again to baptize him, and I kind of wanted to know what made him make that choice at that particular time. He said, well, I want to obey the Lord. And I was under the opinion that he thought all this time that he had been, but he changed his mind. And that's neither here nor there except for the fact that I don't know how the people that taught him in his home approached him. I'm saying they may not have been kind. They probably were. But I just know that for a lot of us, we have had people teach us that weren't always and didn't always present it in a kind manner. There was one gentleman who was very well known in our brotherhood, and I was at Tuya, where for some reason or other we, small as we were, we would always have some of the well-known gospel preachers come and do meetings for us. But sometimes at the end of his statement, it was not very kind and loving. He would offer an invitation, and if nobody wanted to respond, he'd say, well, you can just go to hell then. And I think maybe that kind of attitude is not what we're looking at here about emitting, presenting a kind, loving, peaceful, joyful, radiant person. Now, from a biblical perspective, if we find discouragement and depression and fear and anxiety, things that we deal with often, and I admitted the middle of the night, if I stay awake too long, I can wake up and go to sleep pretty quickly if I don't start thinking and worrying about something that I know full well in the light of day I'm going to see in a whole different way. But in the middle of the night, my thought processes are not great, and so sometimes I can wake up and start to think about even the littlest thing, and well, there's not going to be much sleep the rest of the night. I think that if I would approach those thoughts with this idea of gratitude, it might make a difference. So, discouragement, depression, fear, anxiety, even though we may not think of ourselves as being depressed. Years ago I read a statement that said, you may not be depressed, but you are depressing. And I think that has affected a lot of us maybe. We probably don't need medication for the idea of being depressed, but we sometimes catch ourselves in a depressed way, depressing ourselves. Sometimes we deal with fear. In fact, I've thought over the years too that if love and fear are opposing things, then how much fear I have indicates maybe that amount of love I lack, or that I allow to accept myself to have from the Lord. Anxiety. We tend to attribute these things to difficult or painful circumstances that we have. Kids are doing things that you're concerned about, being in places you worry about, making choices that and now with great grandkids, I get 3 generations of that. Some of y'all do too. Is it what they're doing that makes a difference? We might want to look at the idea that as challenging as our situation or what's going on in our life may be, our frame of mind has less to do with these distressing circumstances than with our need to develop a thankful heart. So, when I wake up in the middle of the night and I start to think about what may be facing me personally, or the children, or grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, instead of thinking about how terrible those situations and the choices for them are and the choices they might make, can I be thankful for that? In everything, all the time, give thanks. And when we think, well, that doesn't really jive with life, then we can look at believers around the world from thousands of years ago to now who scrape by with less than most of us can even think about, and whose days are continually beset with situations and trials and tragedy, who always still, nonetheless, express, and here's a statement that really makes me think, irrepressible peace and joy. That's an exaggerated term, isn't it? Hyperbole, I think I learned. Freshman, sophomore, junior, somewhere along the line. Hyperbole. Exaggeration for effect. Is that exaggerated? The people who have nothing, the Christians now, the young ladies a few years back who are Christians, who folks decided that was not the way to be. For one thing, they were women and they were learning, and for another thing, they were not being true to Muhammad. And so they were killed, persecuted, tortured, and killed. Right now, the folks in Ukraine that we're aware of, who because not just of their religious belief, but religious and political beliefs, are in danger, have to hide, have to do without. It's cold over there, I imagine, even colder than it is here. And sometimes they're doing without heat, doing without warm clothes. Others can tell you much more. Probably going hungry. I'm sure water is hard to come by. Bringing up water, we are kind of in contact with the folks in Amarillo that are drilling wells around the world. And to think about people who don't have water or the water that they have access to makes them terribly sick, and so wells are being drilled. There's so many people, believers, godly people, people who believe in Jesus, some who don't. But all of those people, especially the ones who do believe in Jesus, seem to have this irrepressible peace and joy. And I'm not sure I can describe mine quite that way. The 4-year-old still will let me hug him and sit in my lap some. And that may be as close to irrepressible joy as I feel sometimes. And that doesn't mean I am not thankful and grateful and aware of all else that there is. There was a certain minister who was asked where he was vulnerable to discouragement in his ministry. And he said, honestly, I don't often become discouraged. I continue to see evidence of God's work in my life and the lives of those around me, and I'm simply overwhelmed with thankfulness to Him. There's another hyperbole, isn't it? This gentleman said that that's what he had. I don't know of him. I had not heard of him at all until I read this quote. But here's a minister who evidently served, taught, knew the Lord. And where I have heard over the years from ministers who have been friends that sometimes they were discouraged, sometimes just by they didn't feel effective, sometimes by leadership, which doesn't happen here, but has happened in other places. That they didn't have that attitude. But he said he is simply overwhelmed with thankfulness to God. That's a far cry from just our response to good things that happen, to him taking all of his life with God and being overwhelmed. Now, this list that I'm fixing to read it's from probably 8 or 10 years back, something like that. But I think probably there's still some of this happening. So, in our world right now that we live in, that we're aware of, in our community, our state, our nation, our world, there are folks losing their homes, can't make home payments, home foreclosures. There seems to be high unemployment, and that brings to mind real quick the idea that everybody's wanting people to work and nobody seems to want to work. But there are some situations where people do want to work and they're not able to find that. And that has been the case. This one I think is true, soaring national debt. How many of us in our prayers today said, Lord, thank you for our soaring national debt? That's something that kind of makes us afraid and uncomfortable, doesn't it? Then's a good time to think about, as Brother Jonathan's been talking to us about the kingdom of God, whose kingdom we're in, where we really belong. Now this one probably strikes a little close to home, made for y'all, and from things I read could even become worse. Shrunken retirement accounts. If you've been making investments or if you have already started drawing on those investments for what you have and realize that even when we get a cost of living raise, somewhere along the way there's a little gap between the true cost of living and our cost of living raise, isn't there? Oh, that's something to worry about. And I honestly didn't get up this morning and say, thank you, God, for my shrunken and dwindling retirement. Unending news of global unrest. That goes on all the time. But it's become more apparent the last couple of years, hasn't it? And even before that. But different parts of the world, sometimes it looks like, well, maybe there's a little bit of peace there, and somewhere else there's not. And then we try to intelligently or politically understand why that's taking place. But it's taking place. Starvation and disease, again, people going hungry. And for the millions of tons of food that we as a country and other countries provide to a lot of nations, still the starving folks don't get it, do they? They're still starving, and lots of times they don't even have access to it. It becomes increasingly natural for people to become discouraged, even to feel at times as though God has abandoned this world. And the folks who don't have a very good relationship with God, at least figuratively, shake their fist at God and say, why? Why me? I'm going to tell you a joke, and please understand that I don't believe it. It's just a joke, but it expresses something. The story goes like this. There was a farmer who was trying real hard, just kind of on the edge of being able to survive. Planted a crop one year, and there wasn't even hardly moisture for it to come up, but finally got a little rain, and his wheat crop came up. Well, then it got hailed out. No matter what time of the year it was. So he planted again. Then the bugs got it. So finally, he just barely had time, but he planted it again. It grew, looked like he was going to make a pretty good crop. So he had the combine pulled out into the field. He was ready to start harvesting, and lightning struck the combine. And he looked up to God and he said, why me, Lord? Why me? And the voice said, well, there's just something about you I don't like. Now, I don't believe that. You don't either. But there's some people who do, aren't there? And I would tend to think if we're not careful, when we start concentrating on what goes on, how things are that we don't like, that it's easy for us to say, well, just how much do you care, Lord, about what's going on? For those of us that love and follow Christ, we look around the world and we see secularism and greed and relativism, and those are a temptation for everyone in a way if we're not careful. How many of you in the last week or so have said, I want that, or I would like to have that. That's something I'd like to have or be or do. You see people taking vacations. We've got some real good friends, and they're on Facebook, and we look at their pages, and they're always going somewhere and doing something. In fact, he has access to, if he doesn't own a jet where he flies. And it would be real easy for me. You know, I can see my grandkids off down the Metroplex if I had access to a jet anytime I wanted to fly down there. I don't. I had much rather have what I have. And they're happy people. They've been married for a long time, have good kids, grandkids. They live a good life. They're good people. And so I do not begrudge them of anything they have. But I'm sure that you have someone in your life that you could look at, and even though you're not eat up with envy, that it might be easy to say, you know, I could learn to live like that. I think that's the old saying, isn't it? I could learn to live like that. Grandkids got to take a trip. The granddaughter that is going through chemo again, they found a time that she could not take her medicine for a week, and so my son was given a trip because of the company that he works for. So they've been down in Mexico viewing and fishing and having a good time on the beach for the past week. It's easy when things like that happen to be envious and jealous. I'm not. I'm very happy that my kids, especially the daughter-in-law that's having health problems right now, I'm so glad that she got to enjoy that. And my son too, because when you have a sick spouse, it weighs on you too, doesn't it? And I'm thankful that they have got to do that. Honestly, grateful from my heart, thankful that they've got to do that. An important key to not becoming overwhelmed by what's going on around us, looking for evidences of God's hand at work in the midst of the turmoil, and being, as the fellow said, simply overwhelmed with thankfulness to God. How many times in the Scripture, particularly in the Psalms, we're encouraged to give thanks, to praise the Lord, and to sing to the Lord. And at least outwardly, I know we all do those things. And again, if you're not aware, this lesson, I point way more to me than I do to y'all, because I know many of you are grateful from the heart and have dealt with many more things that I haven't. There's a reason for this constant biblical call to be thankful people. It points to a powerful secret, but one that many of us don't recognize. Gratitude is not merely a second-tier virtue. It's vital and it's transformational. I believe a grateful spirit that is grounded and rooted in God's goodness and grace will radically impact how we view and respond to everything in our life. That's me. I've got to be working on that. As I mentioned, my realizations yesterday of a couple opportunities I have to be grateful all the time for everything that's happening, and not just being upset and confused by it, and upset and having becoming angry even. Talk about road rage, and I've even heard a couple of preachers talk about giving in to road rage a few times. And I think that has to do with a lack of control, inner part to us that wants to correct the evils of the world. So instead of being grateful for what's taking place that somebody else is doing at the time, we're seeing that circumstance that we don't like, instead of seeing opportunity to be grateful and faithful and loving. All right. Now, this should have taken place 2 weeks ago, but let me ask you these questions. What does a grateful person look like? We've got a little bit, 3 or 4 minutes. To you, what does a grateful person look like? What does he say? He or she say? What do they do? What do they think? Sir? Positive attitude. Content. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Not just because Judy said it, but it's a good one. What else? Positive attitude, they're content. What do they say? What kind of words do they utter? Encouraging words. What else? Humble, servant's heart. When we look at Jesus and we see who he was and what he did, and even though it's difficult sometimes to transport him 2,000 years as Jesus and put him in today's world, what would he look like today? I know the wristbands, what would Jesus do? And I think that's good. Sometimes good things become so commercialized or so apparent from what they say that they lose their power. But what would Jesus be like, and what would he be saying today? What would he be doing today as far as this idea of gratitude? All right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Didn't raise his hand. The only time he raised his hand was to clear the temple, wasn't it? I've thought about that over the years, to give me an excuse for getting angry and a little violent out of hand. I think that's a very good excuse and reason. Okay, how he was, humble and caring and loving and kind and giving, serving. And every time that he was with a crowd and he was going to eat or drink, be together with a group, what was the first thing he did? He gave thanks, didn't he? And I would choose to believe that that was always heartfelt. I don't think it. Okay, what does an ungrateful person look like? What does he say or think or do? How do they act? Like me? Well, maybe not. What does an ungrateful person look like? What does ingratitude look like? Sir? Grumpy all the time. Yeah, sometimes I get accused of that. Well, last time I got to teach, I had a class of 8th grade girls, sweet for the most part, as 8th grade girls can be. Sang very well, but they told me that I looked like the Grinch. So I gather that I was not having the most pleasant look on my face all the time. All right, grumpy. Envious. Why do you suppose that covetousness was one of the 10 commandments? Actually, it's which one? It's the last one, isn't it? Do you think it was the most important one? If we want to rank them, sometimes we rank them, have no other gods before me, make no graven image, don't take the Lord's name in vain, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. And then he lists some things, doesn't he? Your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's house, your neighbor's flock. Your neighbors, he said. And they were evidently a pretty tight-knit community. That me and folks traveling along all together through the desert, they're probably pretty close together. Covetousness could have been a very important thing, wouldn't it? Because obviously there would have been some folks there who had more than others had. Somebody had a prettier wife than somebody else had. Somebody else had more talented kids than somebody else had. Envy, covetousness. What else? Looked at those 3 a while ago that I confessed to. Bitter, prickly. What are some descriptive words for a grateful person? Now, you've given me what they may look like. So, and some of you have given me that. Again, what are descriptive words of a grateful person? Got humble over here a while ago. Content. Loving. So love and gratitude work together. Oh, I'm not going to get to that verse. I'm going to read that verse right quick. All right. This is in the next week lesson, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Now, I know we're talking about gratitude. And this love is talking about God's unconditional love and us taking on that love. But it seems to me there is a correlation there. And that's what I'll leave you to think about and where we'll start for next week. Thank you all so much again. Appreciate your comments and your attention.